and welcome to Pods Like Us. I'm Martin Quibell, known to my friends as Marv, and this time I am talking with Gilbert Anguiano of the Mind Buzz podcast. Thanks for being here, Gil. I hope I've got your name right.
No, you did. That was perfect. Thanks, Marv, for having me on.
That's fine. That's great. So, how were you introduced to podcasting?
Podcasting. Okay, so Marv, how do you like how's the whole censorship on your show? I know my show is anything goes, cursing. I mean, I do talk about drugs, so I just wanted to ask you about that first before I get started.
I have a host of different sounds to be able to cover up any curse words.
Oh, okay, great. Well then, I started podcasting in my head for about 10 years. So
Okay.
that's always been a kind of, like a hobby that I've always wanted to get into because I've played music. I love listening to music. I love recording music. I love writing and reading. So when I start to listen to podcasts out here, I just got this deep feeling within myself that, this is something that I can probably get into. So, of course, everybody out here, well, I shouldn't say everybody, but Joe Rogan is well known
Yes.
over here. So, I mean, around the world, right? So, I watched a couple of his shows, and one stood out in particular to me, and that was the podcast where he had Dennis McKenna, brother of Terrence McKenna, and they were talking about the stoned ape theory, which that kind of threw me into a rabbit hole of all these different types of theories of psychedelic mushrooms, of DMT, of all that types of stuff. So after watching that and just being mind blown about the stoned ape theory, I kind of went into this rabbit hole of trying to find what a psychedelic experience was and what is it, and just engulfed myself into the history of lysergic acid diethylamide, LSD, and all other types of books around magic mushrooms. And I read Terrence McKenna's stuff, and it just awed me. And I was like, you know what? I'm gonna start a podcast about the psychedelic experience. But as I was writing my scripts and all that stuff, and it kind of evolved more than that, more than psychedelics. It had, and if you listen to my show, it's prevalent in my show that I do talk about motivating yourself and reading and keeping educated and listening to yourself and just going above and beyond to what what you can do. And I mean, all that positive vibes and positive stuff that I like to project in my show. So it kind of, it evolved, definitely.
Okay, so how would you describe your show?
My show, it's evolved from psychedelics and the history of psychedelics, and then it kind of evolved in right now. I'm actually doing a lot of educational stuff, and pretty much the stuff that your teachers wouldn't teach you in school is pretty much what I wanted to cover. So anything that you didn't get taught in school, go ahead and go over to the Mind Buzz. You'll learn lots of cool stuff, and maybe stuff that you've already learned, but maybe another tidbit that you didn't.
Okay, so when you do your show, what sort of research do you do for the show, or do you just come at it without any planning? Do you use research?
Research. So pretty much, I don't have like a set, you know, code of conduct that
Oh,
I try to put my show on. It just kind of happens if I think about a topic. Um, as for instance, I'm working on right now is I'm working on the banned books of America, and what books have been banned. What books have I read? Have you read? Or any of my listeners have read that are banned, and why would they be banned if they were on the curriculum already? So normally I pick a topic. I try to, research my topic as much as I can. I have a few books, in my library that I have here at home that that I read into, and then I kind of just go back and forth. I tried to look at both sides of the story on each of these topics. So it might seem that I'm going back and forth on my point of views, which I tend to do. So it's kind of research for both myself and the listener.
okay. So how do you pick which guest that you have with you to have the discussions with?
I do have a wide range of personal friends and coworkers that I I choose from, and I want to stop right here and just thank you, Marv, for having me on the show today. I really appreciate that.
That's
And
okay.
when I got your message, I was like, oh wow, somebody wants me to be on their podcast. That's pretty cool. So I feel I feel like what my guests feel, and I appreciate it. Thank you.
That's okay.
And so going back to my guests, how I really choose them. I do have a podcast on women empowerment. So I thought about that topic, and I thought about who in my circle of friends, or maybe my circle of friends, knows somebody that has a particular point of view on the topic, and I reach out to them and ask them if they want to be on my podcast.
Okay. I know you've only been going for a few months, but are there any standout moments from shows?
Standout moments. So I do have an episode called "Provoke Your Mind," and
Okay.
with that one, it's I do that show with a buddy of mine, uh, Leo, and me and him. The reason why it stands out to me because it wasn't a show that I drafted on a piece of paper, or it wasn't something that was a predisposition that I was thinking about. It was kind of just let's grab the mics, let's grab the headphones, and let's press record, and let's see what happens. Let's see where the conversation takes us. And I think those episodes are always fun. They're always fun to do because it's all free thoughts and freeing your mind on a mic, and those are always fun. So that's one of the episodes that stands out to me.
Okay. So I think you've already mentioned this, but do you have a specific way that the show goes? Do you start at one point and follow a certain structure that it flows through, or do you just let the conversation just flow naturally?
I do a little bit of both, Marv. And I do have a kind of rhetoric or a list that I go through, and
Okay.
I get those points, and if the conversation leads us to another point, I kind of just let it flow and let it go within the conversation piece. And then if I feel that if it's, veering off too much, then I try to wrangle the conversation back onto the topic. But other than that, I kind of let the conversation go into wherever it takes us. I mean, that's some of the funnest things you can do with podcasting. You can just keep talking and talking and talking until the cows come home. And
that's true.
Yeah, I mean, as long as your message is there within everything, I think it's all gold. And it's all those little fillers and fluffers and laughs and stuff that you can get from a show. So
you're doing basically the same as me then, where I have, as you've noticed, I have like what I call bullet points. So they're
right.
The ones where I always try to make sure that those bullet points are hit during the show. But if the conversation veers away, like you said, you just let it flow and make sure it doesn't go too far off, and that you do always come back to these points. Yeah.
Oh,
so
yes,
it's much
definitely.
The same.
Yeah, and I did a couple of shows where it was just bullet point, bullet point, bullet point, and I figured that I went back and listened to it, and I was just like, let me tweak this a little bit. Let me change this so that way for next time I can see how it goes. And it's an ongoing process for me, definitely.
Well, that's a very good segue. That is to, how do you edit the show and put it together?
Same way. You said edit, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So editing is probably by far one of my favorite parts of from research. You get a certain way in researching, and then doing the show, you get to, express what you've researched, and then right down to even the editing part too. I find that that when I'm editing, I leave out a couple of things, and that's where most of my notes come from, is editing. And through the conversation, I get some pretty new ideas, or ideas that I wanted to add on to the episode. And I take my notes, and then within like an editing period of like an hour, I get an idea for like 3 or 4 different new topics that I want to cover in different episodes. So editing is great. Like that's pretty much what I do when I edit. And I listen to every show from start to finish, minute by minute.
Yep.
And trying to get all those ums out of there, and all the ums and pauses, and all the dogs barking or whatever, all those sounds that you don't want your listeners to listen to on the podcast. I try to get out, but I try to leave a little bit to leave the human element inside the show.
You want to get rid of all those people using jackhammers outside and that.
Oh yeah. Yeah, especially and that's where I learned most of like the sound technique and the noise reduction techniques. I learned them just from doing it. I mean, you can read all you want on learning how to do a podcast and editing a podcast, but until you do it, I mean, it's kind of tough, but until you do it, you'll start to get your rhythm and your flow of doing your podcast.
That's true. This other show that you mentioned, what's that? Because I don't know about this other show that you do.
Oh no, it's just one show.
Oh right, because you mentioned one where you were talking about women's empowerment.
Correct.
Yeah.
That was one of the episodes. That was women empowerment and feminism, which we talk a lot about history and about quotes in that show, and we kind of just see how the women empowerment movement moved across America from the 1800s all the way up until now. This year, we celebrated 100 years of women's suffrage in the United States. So that was a pretty cool. That was a really unique episode, considering that it was the centennial celebration for that.
I'm looking forward to getting to that episode. I've only listened to the first two so far, but I'll get there.
Great. Yeah, another good episode that I just finished was the drug paradox. That one was the weighted episode that I wanted to launch my very first couple of episodes. So that was a weighted, anticipated one. And I want to actually do a series on the drug paradox and throw in a couple of, other items. And that was another forethought that I thought about after editing that show as well.
So let's go into more detail on what you call the drug paradox. Explain what it is again.
Okay, so the drug paradox that I kind of came up with was that the degree in which drugs are painted in society and our culture. So there's plenty of drugs out there that the government paints as illegal, and there's pharmaceuticals that paint drugs that they cure you. So the meaning behind the drug paradox, and we can quickly define paradox as something that is pretty much an oxymoron, like something that is particularly good for you, but also bad. So in the drug paradox, I paint it as what I typically did with the drug paradox. I just focused on lysergic acid diethylamide, which is LSD, and I went behind in how the MK Ultra project started and the U.S. government back in the 1950s, and I kind of painted the picture of how lysergic acid kind of evolved and transformed U.S. government and U.S. policy as far as how they wanted to treat hallucinogenics. So at the end of 1968, they meaning the government, they cut off all ties for the project of MK Ultra.
Yep.
So they were using it for well over 2 decades, about 20 years, even longer than that, and they didn't know what they did. That what they did was they created the whole counterculture that actually started to protest and advocate for these hallucinogens, and it was just a big hysteria that happened within the counterculture of America in the 1960s.
Yeah, I mean the truth behind it all from what I've heard before and read about was that it was used a lot by dentists.
Right. Yeah. A lot of
back in the day, because I know that it was a dentist that introduced it to the Beatles apparently, and they found out that apparently they went round to a friend's. I think it was John Lennon and George Harrison, the first ones. They went to a friend who was a dentist, and he gave it them for the first time, and then said to them, "Look, but there's a famous story where they went there and they were going to a party or something afterwards, and the friend said to them, well, I think before you go, I think you ought to wait maybe a couple of hours or something before you leave, because the effects of what I've given you might make it difficult for you driving and going to these places." But they still left, and then they mentioned about having these hallucinations in that famous. They even mention it in the Beatles anthology series of films as well.
Okay.
But yeah, they were saying that it was a dentist that introduced it to them, and I heard that it was by accident that it's almost like they gave a slightly higher dosage to themselves to get that high and get that hallucinogenic response. So I've
Right.
heard.
Like exactly. So like a lot of entheogens, which are plant psychedelics, they in small doses they work as a stimulant, but once you get like you start adding a larger dose, they become hallucinogenic. They become a little bit more than what they are at a smaller dose. Take, for instance, kratom. Kratom is a plant derivative. In small doses is a stimulant, but once you start uh, having a bigger dose, it acts more as a depressant.
Yeah.
So that right now is kratom in the States is in a gray area. Also, you can go to any store and pick up kratom. I just picked up some the other day at a flea market. Some guy that he was selling some teas, and I've tried it. Like it's really good. It does act as a stimulant, and it's pretty much just a large thing of coffee.
Yep.
Pretty much,
Okay.
it acts as a caffeine. Um,
Okay.
but that's kratom, and it's funny that you mentioned the Beatles and English types over there. The first person um, to turn oh, I forgot his name. What's his name? What's his name? Um, shoot. Let me get his name because I have the other guy, Michael. Have you heard Michael Hollingshead? Hollingshead?
I've heard of him somewhere, but I can't remember how I've heard of him.
He's so he was. Let's see, Timothy Leary. I'm sorry. So
Oh
Timothy
yes.
Leary.
Yep.
Yeah, so Timothy Leary was a psychologist back in the 1960s that was advocating for acid. But the first person to turn that guy on to LSD was Michael Hollingshead, and he was a British researcher who studied the psychedelic drugs, including psilocybin and LSD. So
Okay.
he was an English researcher at the University of Harvard. Um, so he was pretty much the one to turn Timothy Leary on to that. I mean, this researching all the drug paradox and the the derivatives from LSD and psilocybin, which is in magic mushrooms. It opens it opens so many things to the CIA, to MK Ultra, to to many different like you were saying, dentists. There's so many odd figures and odd organizations that were connected within this hallucinogenic, back in the 60s and the 50s also.
That's
So
true. Yep.
it's pretty interesting. I've been looking at this stuff for some time now, and it just blows my mind. It blows my mind. I've I'm reading this book on Latin America, and once it starts talking about Cuba, it blew my mind even more because they threw around the name Alan Dulles. Alan Dulles, the he was the longest running director of the CIA, and he had big business ties within Cuba back in the 60s. So after that, I'm just like, whoa, this is getting too much. And I was telling my girlfriend over the phone, she was like, okay, you need to stop reading and you need to go to bed.
Yes. Yes. But is he the one that Air America is based upon?
Which one was that?
The one where basically the CIA were running drugs from Cuba to America and vice versa.
Exactly. Yes. Yes. So,
Yep.
I was telling her, well, about all these, different connections, and she's like, okay, yeah, all right, you please don't go crazy, please don't. but I'm telling her, I'm not going crazy. This is all real stuff that people don't really, the normal person doesn't really see. And I feel that hey, this is the information. You can choose whether to believe it or not, but here's the information. Here are the books that are totally different, away from each other, written in totally different decades, but they all say the same thing. They all say the same.
And as a side note, the Beatles then met Timothy Leary, and Timothy Leary is the one who introduced John Lennon to the Tibetan Book of the Dead.
Correct. Exactly.
Yep. And of course that because of the Tibetan Book of the Dead, you've got the John Lennon written song that is seen as one of the first big psychedelic songs, which would be "Tomorrow Never Knows," which quotes blatantly from the Tibetan Book of the Dead as well.
Right. And with Timothy Leary, I like what he did with the Tibetan Book of the Dead. He also, him and Richard Halpert, which later known as Ram Dass, they both wrote another book that was derived from the Tibetan Book of the Dead, but they characterized the psychedelic experience within the written scripts of the Tibetan Book of the Dead. So they wrote the psychedelic experience guidebook also with that, which I have a copy of that, and I've read some of that stuff, and it's mind blowing how much detail he goes into with the psychedelic experience.
Yeah, I've got a copy of that book in my archive somewhere as well. Yeah.
Right. So, I mean, with the psychedelic music coming into pop culture in the 1960s, it has largely inspired that whole group of music. Starting with the Beatles, with them writing the Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band and Revolver, and coming from that too is the Rolling Stones and I can't remember, Your Majesty's Satanic. What is it?
Their Satanic Majesties. Yep.
Exactly.
And also Goat's Head Soup as well.
I'm sorry, what was that?
I think their other album, Goat's Head Soup, was around that period as well, and was influenced by it.
Exactly. So, tons of music coming from that era, as opposed to the others. I mean, it reflected drug-induced states through feedback, through electronics, intense volume, the playback, and tons of great stuff. I mean, just even with the art too, what they did with which it really flopped, the Magic Mystery Tour. I read somewhere that it didn't do as well as, well, the film didn't do as well as Hard Day's Night and all the others.
No, but then again, there's a long history of the arts being inspired or influenced by drug culture, because you've got even going as far back as poets like Byron and writers such as Shelley and those people. They all famously explored the drug culture.
Exactly. Like even with Aldous Huxley, he was the guy that wrote the Doors of Perception.
Yes. Yep.
Which I also included in the Drug Paradox. I just gave a little clip about how the Doors from Venice Beach, California, how they derived their their band name The Doors from Aldous Huxley's The Doors of Paradox. I mean, excuse me, The Doors of Perception.
Yeah. But then again, I mean, that would possibly be from Jim Morrison, because he was famously somebody who liked to. Well, he wasn't the only member of the Doors that used drugs. That's for sure.
Oh,
but
yeah,
he's
definitely.
a well-known advocate.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Great band also. I mean,
Absolutely.
a lot of
yes. Yeah.
a lot of great bands coming out of the bands coming out of the British invasion of the U.S.
Yes.
Of the U.S. market and folk rock also.
That's true. Well, I mean, you had Crosby, Stills and Nash. You had Graham Nash from the British group The Hollies came over to America, to California, and joined David Crosby and Stephen Stills to make that band.
Yep. The Hollies. What was that song? Bus Stop. That's got to be like one. That's got to be like one. I know it's not from the psychedelic era, but no. that whole mod scene also from British culture also.
That was actually written by Graham Goldman out of the band 10cc, if you know them.
Really? No, I didn't.
Yes,
I didn't know.
Yes, he wrote a lot of very famous songs for other bands and artists in the late 60s. So you've got that, and another really famous one that you might know might be "For Your Love" by the Yardbirds.
Oh yes.
That is also a Graham Goldman song as well. One that he wrote. Yes.
Huh. What group was he originally from?
I can't remember what group he was in the 60s, but I do know that he was part of the group 10cc, who were a bit of an art rock band in the 1970s, who had a couple of hits in America, but were more famous in the UK. You'd probably know "I'm Not in Love" by 10cc. I would have thought.
Okay.
That's one of their most famous ones over there, I think. But
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, even to bring up more British rock bands, the Cream.
Yep.
Formed in London. Lots of great stuff. I know Jimmy's originally from the U.S., but he got most of his most of his hits were in London before he coming back to the States and gaining popularity over here. He was over there rocking out with his.
It's a strange one that with Jimmy, because he had a career in America, but then, so I mean, he was a guitarist for hire in the States. Mm-hmm. So did a lot of sessions for people such as Chuck Berry and Little Richard, and but then when he came over to the UK, he wanted to be a solo artist anyway, and then he seemed to just be in the right place at the right time, where he met was it Chas Chandler, that was in the Animals, and who became the manager, and then suddenly he became the Jimi Hendrix that we know. It's a strange thing. It was almost like it was there, but somebody needed to unlock that potential from him. And it's almost like he needed to come to the UK for that to happen. And to meet, Eric Clapton, and to meet the Beatles, and to meet all these people, for that to come into to happen. Yeah.
Well, I'm glad he did that, because if he didn't do that, who knows if we would have had the Jimi Hendrix that we knew today, if he would have stood in the States. Yeah. So I'm glad for that, definitely, and I'm glad for the guy from the Animals to help him out and do that and manage him.
So am I. I think they were a perfect team, the both of them together, because I've seen documentaries, and he seems like they had a really good bond, friendship between them, and it worked for them both, I think.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah. What do you think of the situation with Kamala Harris as vice president? Do you think that's a good thing for the future of women in the world, in America, and the empowerment of women?
When I think Kamala Harris, so
I don't normally go into politics, but I thought I'd just mention it because of it being basically she is an empowered woman now.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
She not only empowers women, but she also empowers women of color. When I bring up, or when her name comes up in a lot of the conversations within politics, she's a woman of first. She's a woman of uh, first woman that's going to be vice president elect, first Indian woman of color as vice president elect, first Black American being vice president elect. So she has all these firsts. And then not only, well, I can say this, not only she is the first woman of color being a vice president, but she's also a first woman coming from California that is going to be in the White House also. So that's a big win for California. She grew up in Oakland, I believe, or some part in the Bay Area. And that's also a big win for not only women of color, people of color, but also people of color coming from California going into politics also. So that's a huge win for the empowerment of the state of California also. Not only that, she does have some big plans for decriminalizing marijuana also. So not only marijuana, but just not hallucinogens, but just drugs in general in the state of California. And possibly we can see that in a federal state too. Not to mention Oregon has also decriminalized hallucinogens and all drugs in Oregon also. So there's a huge shift going on politically, along with entheogens and just drugs in general here in the United States. I love to see that, and it's great. There's a big pivotal change going on right now.
Definitely. I really hope that having her in that position will push things further on with the racial problems that there are, and with the still obvious signs of sexism here and there in the world as well.
Right, yeah. And then it pushes the envelope of just being altogether progressive within the political climate that we are in now.
Yeah, and I think with things as they are currently at the moment, with all people's minds being on understandably on the coronavirus, the COVID-19, I think that's a nice thing for them to be able to look into that, but also say, look, we've got that, but we're also looking into the race issue. We're looking into the way that women are treated, the way that all the LGBTQ and all these things, we're looking into all these things. I think that is a really good move forward that will make people more positive about the future, because at the moment, all the news is about this disease. And I think the world actually needs more positivity there from the people in power.
Yes, exactly. And it all comes down from the top. I mean, water falls down from the top. So as soon as we get our positive minds together within the top, starting with the top officials within government, all that's it's gonna come down and rain down, and hopefully be spread among the common folk. So I think that is a great thing for women, and it's a great thing for people of color, and it's all a progressive move that I hope that our country will make a big shift in being progressive. So it's all positive, all positive.
Absolutely. So what other podcast do you listen to yourself?
Myself?
Yep.
Let's see, let me pull in my So the podcast that I usually listen, of course, I mentioned Joe Rogan, but as for Joe's podcast, I pretty much pick and choose on who he has on the show as far as
Yeah.
like guests, and I pick and choose on those. Another podcast I listen to is The Daily by the New York Times. That one's a cool one. Also,
Okay.
those are the big name podcasts that I listen to. I've listened to your podcast and I enjoy it.
Thank you very much.
I listened to Psychedelics Today, which is a podcast about the psychedelic community, and I actually was going to base my podcast, the Mind Buzz podcast, on the way they set up theirs, but I kind of wanted to go into a little bit more freeform podcasting style, so I kind of veered away from that one. And I'm finding new podcasts every day, and there's millions and millions out there, and it's just I wish I can listen to them all. I really
so do I. So do I.
There's only so many minutes in the day that you can listen to podcasts. If I can throw my headphones on and listen to them while I'm sleeping, let's go grab my headphones. You know what I mean?
We've only got 24 hours in the day, not like Star Trek universe where there's 26 hours in a day.
Right? I mean, having 26 would be awesome. Even if there was like some kind of device that we can, plug into our brain and we can just podcast in our head and hit the record button. I mean, I'm all for that. So hopefully Elon Musk or somebody comes up with something like that. Or even if we're in the car, we can just hit the record button and podcast in the car. That's where I get most of my ideas.
He's probably already recording shows in his head ready.
Right?
And then he's going to surprise people, Elon Musk, and he'll just put them out there for everybody eventually when he's done them all.
Probably.
You'll think a podcast in your head and it will just appear online.
That is pretty cool. That'd be kind of scary. I'd have to have a lot of censorships on mine.
Yes, me too. What advice would you give to new podcasters, Gil?
To new podcasters, don't look at numbers. Don't look at stats. Don't compare yourself. I like to throw around the 3 C's in my podcast, which is condemnation, comparison, and complaining. So when you start to compare yourself to different podcasts, I think that's a big no-no, because you're comparing yourself to your beginning to somebody's middle. And there's always going to be a friction within looking at yourself like, oh, look at, I barely have, 3 followers, and this person has 1 million or 1,000 or even 100. You've already lost in my sense. So my biggest thing would probably not to compare yourself to another podcast. Yeah,
that's great. That's in agreement with. I don't know if you heard the one, but the first show that I did, that's exactly what Robbie of Out of the Blank was basically saying.
Right.
He was saying if you connect with even 10 people or whatever, then you've connected with those 10 people that they hadn't connected with before. So he's just saying that. He said, so numbers. He said the numbers. Don't bother about it. He says just bother about putting the content out there, and people will listen. That's what he says.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Perfectly said. Yeah. I mean, as for me, like I would put up my first podcast and my very first episode. Actually, I did the first 3. I did them all within a span of 1 week. And when I was ready to actually start the podcast, I had 3 episodes already ready to go, ready to download. So
Yeah.
with that, I was seeing a slow return in listeners, and I was beating myself up for a week and a half, and I was like, I got to get another episode. I got to do something. I got to make an Instagram. I got to make a Twitter. I have to
Yeah.
do something. But I was fretting about, getting the content on different platforms and doing all these different types of stuff of marketing and stuff. But you know what I was missing, Marv? I was missing the whole key point in doing the podcast, and that's your content. That's
Yes.
how
Yeah.
that's the meat. Of course, marketing is one, and getting your stuff out there. Uh, that's that's also a point, but you can get them to your podcast. But if your content is not in there, if your whole theme of your the whole theme of your
Show.
podcast is not,
Yeah.
if it's not there, then what do you have? So
Of
I
course,
don't
because
know.
it's always there, isn't it? Now that you've put it out there, it's
Hmm.
there, so the listeners will come because even maybe a month down the line, 2 months, or some shows. I'm listening to now that people
Hmm.
recorded years ago. Listening to them, and they'll have probably forgotten about those episodes.
Right.
But they're there, so you've got those listeners there. Even in the future, they'll be able to listen to the show. Yeah,
Yeah, we're time traveling pretty much. We're
right.
we're
We're
going
time traveling.
back.
Yeah,
Yeah, exactly. That's one of the points that I usually bring up in when I have returning guests on my show. I tell them, "Hey guys, welcome to the Mind Buzz. You probably listened to episode 3. Well, we're episode 9 now, and I have Andy here again with me, or something fun like that.
yeah.
I try to try to have fun with it pretty much on the show, and learning something in the middle of the show or at the beginning or the end. I mean, to project the education on there and the self positivity on there is what we like to do.
That's great. So, where can people find out more about you and the show then, Gil?
On You can definitely go to Spotify. I'm on Spotify, the Mind Buzz, uh, Apple Podcast, Instagram. I've done some cool graphics on there, made some cool clips
Yeah,
on
seen
there,
those.
on the Instagram. So that's the Mind Buzz podcast on Instagram as well. And then I'm generally on all the platforms also.
Okay. Thank you very much for talking with me, Gil, and thank you to everybody for listening, and hope you listen again to Pods Like Us. How are you? Have you been to the dentist today, or have you still got to go?
Oh no, that was my first stop this morning, was the dentist.
How did it go? Did it go okay?
I did well. I was there maybe about a day ago, so it worked out pretty good. And they
Good.
had me to come. They had me come back, so everything checks out fine. Yeah, I was kind of worried about the whole COVID thing, going to the dentist, but I figure this is the time to go. Nobody's going. But when I went, I mean, there's tons of people there, so you can't
Wow.
win.
And there you are, trying to keep out the way of people. Socially
Exactly.
distancing. Yes.
Yeah, no, there's no social distancing at all. Not even
No.
at the dentist.
Oh, okay. Lovely. Yes. Right. So you've not been going for long either with your show.
No, not at all. I've been going about a couple of months. So I started doing the whole podcasting thing in July, I believe.
Yeah. Do you know what, Gil? We'll start the show officially, shall we? Okay.
Oh yeah, sure.
If that's right, yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
I just thought
I was waiting for
questions.
a bell or something.
Yeah. Okay. A bell. That's what I need. Martin Quibell needs a bell.
Oh yes, definitely. Yes. All right, Marv. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry about all the trouble at the beginning.
Oh, no worries. That's always, it's something we learn. So how so you're on your phone doing the recording?
I'm doing this on my phone at the moment, and it's recorded it to the cloud.
Really?
Yes.
That's amazing.
It will be if it works.
If it works. Yeah.
Otherwise I'll be calling you again.
If not, that's fine. That would be cool. Yeah. I mean, even to bring you on to the Mind Buzz, that would be awesome too. If you like to do that.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
That'd be great.
Yeah. Just try and fit it around my shift pattern, which is very strange because I'm a night shift worker. And I never get weekends off.
Really?
No.
Got it. Okay. Wow, that's amazing.
Can you hear me?
Yep, now I can. How you doing, Marv?
Not bad. How are you? How are you doing?
Oh, I'm doing well, considering.
Same here. But although, the lockdown doesn't really change things for me because I'm still working. So, because we're locked down again over in the UK.
That's what I heard. What's the deal with that?
I think it's because the numbers are going up quite a lot. So they've just thought that cutting down on people meeting up, they're hoping that might cut down on the numbers, hopefully.
Oh, okay, I see. Right. Which, I mean, do you see change in numbers after they do lockdown, or what's your point of view on that?
What's my point of view on that? It's a strange one, really, because of the gestation of the supposed gestation of the virus. They said that it can take a couple of weeks for symptoms to appear. So what you've got there is they'll do the lockdown, but really they need to wait a couple of weeks at least to see if the numbers, see what happens with the numbers, which is probably why they've done it for 4 weeks, really, because they're thinking if we leave it for 4 weeks, then we'll see where it is then when it's had the time to actually all the cases to appear that are there, and then we'll see what the numbers are like at that point. I suppose that's how they're doing it. It makes sense.
No, of course. Yeah, there's some there's some like jet lag with some time between the incubation period from person to person. So, yeah. Do they give you like a set amount of time that they're going to be locked down, or they just say, okay, everybody's locked down and we'll let you know when to come out?
Right. When they put England or the UK on lockdown towards the beginning of the year in March, that was an indefinite time. They'd not given a specific time for that, and it lasted for a long time as well. I think it lasted from March, and we went into a tier system in July.
Right.
So March, April, May, June, July. So that was 4 months, I think, nearly that lasted for.
Wow.
And this one, they've given it 4 weeks, although I personally think that's probably more to do with financial reasons than any other. What with Christmas, with it being the lead up to Christmas, so that's the big financial. Everybody goes shopping and buys presents, isn't it? So that might be the cynic in me. I don't know.
It's all critical thinking, Marv. Right?
It is. I suppose it's it's a well-used adage, but they are sort of stuck between a rock and a hard place where they've got to think of people's health, but the finance of the country also has to be looked into as well, because they need money to keep everything afloat.
Right.
And that's the same with governments all over the world, I suppose.
Oh yeah, of course.
Yeah.
No, yeah, you're right.
Even for orange people are orange, with funny blonde supposed hair.
Oh man, I can tell you, Marv. I feel so fortunate to be living in this time period that we are in human history, because I got to tell you, there's a lot of things going on.
Yes, there are.
This is probably got to be the most. I don't know if it's the most interesting presidential election for the United States, or I knew that something was bound to happen with considering the pandemic and the economic state that the world is in, and especially California that it's in.
Yes.
And it's amazing.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
It's great to be a writer and a content creator and a podcaster around this time. So
it is. I mean, I was saying I recorded a show with, I don't know if you noticed, I did a show with the people who do, the film program, Lost and Found and Rewound. And they're from the States. They're from the central states. I can't remember whereabouts. And I was saying to them that, because they mentioned the film, I think it was The Last Man on Earth or something.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a scene in that or whatever where there's all these vans and they're basically just full of dead bodies, and they're building like this enormous trench and just burying bodies in there. And I said to them, when they mentioned that film in passing, I said, when you mentioned that, I said, it made me think about the film from the footage from New York with those, where they built that trench and they just put all those coffins with people in this trench in New York, didn't they? And I said it's a horrific thing to see, but also what's horrific is the fact that the person in charge almost ignores that all of this is going on to a degree.
Right, exactly. And even with the George Orwell book, 1984, just all the similarities from that book, and you look at current events, it's like it's strange. Is it life imitating art, or is it the latter, or art imitating life?
Yeah, I always thought that George Orwell was probably 10, 15 years too soon. I think it was more like 1995 or 1999 when all of the Big Brother states started to come into being. So should we say? Yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Also thinking about if he's if he's some sort of time traveler, that's what they say too about the creator of The Simpsons. How there's some predictive programming going on within The Simpsons also.
Yeah, it's a strange one, but sometimes these things happen though, because like I was saying about those people I talked to the other night, same program again, where I was talking to those that do that film program, and they were saying how one of their or most of their shows, they recorded those last year before the lockdown.
Really?
So they're releasing episode. They released an episode the other week about the film The President's Analyst, and in passing they mentioned Sean Connery. But that episode was recorded last year at the tail end, around November, December. And it's just coming out now. And they'd mentioned Sean Connery in passing.
Wow.
And they also... And who else did they mention? They mentioned Eddie Van Halen in the same episode.
Whoa.
And it was like, wow. You don't realise... Because all these things, like our show, we're recording it now, it'll be out. Well, this one's been out next week, but one I recorded earlier on, that's not coming out until end of January, beginning of February. But people listening don't realise that these things are said before time, and they just think, "Oh, that's a bit timely that you've mentioned that." But they didn't intend it to be at all. It's so strange.
It is strange. Flabbergasted.
It is. Yeah. It's a bit like Leonardo Da Vinci basically inventing the helicopter over 200 years before it came out.
Oh right, yes, with all his different art. There's quite a few actually in and around his time, and a lot of people speculate that there were ancient aliens that he depicted ancient aliens in his paintings. So ancient astronauts, they're calling them.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. And then he ends up appearing in Star Trek Voyager with the helicopter pictures and that he made as well.
Oh yeah, that's right.
I've got Star Trek in again.
Oh man.
Right, get into the bones of why we're talking then. After I cancel this phone call.
Oh, there it is. Let me do the same to mine.
It's because this is a phone for alarms to come through.
Oh, okay.
But that's just a check call. It's not an alarm.
Oh, okay.
Oh no. I'm okay, thanks. Bye. The even funnier thing about that is actually somebody that listens to the show.
Oh, really?
Yes. One of my work colleagues listens to every episode.
How awesome.
Now that is an absolute keeper.
Definitely.
That is definitely a keeper for the show. That is going in there. That is, yeah. People need to hear that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, Gil, thank you very much for that. I'll catch up with you again, my friend.
All right, Marv. We'll see you. Thank you.
You take care. Stay safe.
You do the same. You
Take
do the
care.
same.
Bye.
Thanks, pal.
Bye.
Bye.